Now, obviously, a lot of students will have noticed that the UCU has been in the headlines recently. Yeah, if you could sort of give us a summary, what is the current issue with these cuts that are going on around the university?
Well, there's quite a history there. The university last October declared that it was going to make a 35 million cut from this year's budget by the end of this year. This was a few weeks after they discovered that they'd lost 20 million a year over 5 years, £100 million. They said that the two things weren't related, but we're not actually sure that the announcement of a cut a few weeks after the discovery of this accounting error aren't connected. But sorry.
That's what this is. There's 20 million's in an accounting error. They got their sums mixed up.
Yeah, 20 million a year over 5 years, so that's 100 million that disappeared from their budgets, as it were.
Okay, and has anyone been made accountable for this 20 million? Do you know?
Not that I'm aware of. Nobody publicly has been made accountable for it. And on the contrary, in public statements, they've stated that nobody is at fault, and they've made a big deal about how this is nobody's money in the first place. It's just money that shouldn't have been put into the spreadsheet.
Okay.
But that's by the by. Their argument is, I say it's by the by, but it's actually quite important that this happened and that somehow it's not important that they make a big financial error like that, a forecasting error. I think that is important. But their argument is that the 35 million cut that they want to make, they would have had to make anyway.
This is due to government, top-slicing across the country of university funding.
That's right, but they declared that they were going to cut 35 million before the government declared how much they needed to cut by. And some of that, it looks like they preempted the government by too large an amount. If you look at other universities around the country who waited until the government announced the cuts, what we have now is Leeds has got one of the largest proportional cuts in the sector. And that would seem to indicate that they jumped the gun too far. And obviously they're not going to backtrack. They're too proud to say, well, maybe we don't need to cut that quite that much. But our figures would indicate that actually it's not as big as that at Leeds. They don't need to make that amount of cut. And certainly it's going to have a very, very drastic impact on education provision, losing that many staff and having that amount of impact on resources such as library and IT and buildings.
Okay. We did talk about this impact. Is there any way we can sort of visualise what the impact is going to be? Is it going to be no staff in the library or one less teacher out of every 5 or something like that? Just so we can get a firmer idea of what it will be.
We've calculated that between 650 and 700 members of staff in the whole university.
How many employed in the university?
About between 7,000 and 8,000.
Okay, so about 10%.
So about 10%, so 1 in 10 lecturers, as it were, or 1 in 10 library staff will have to go. Of course, there's going to be local variations on that. There may be more going in some departments than in others. But that's roughly what we're looking at, and that's quite a large number of people that are leaving. And so that means, especially when we're looking at more student numbers coming in, that means more students in every class. And the argument is, the university is arguing that won't impact on education provision. But the people who are making that argument don't teach. They don't know what it's like here, and we're already stretched. If you look at how universities were 10 years ago, if you went back 10 years and said, this is how you will be teaching in 2010, we would have been horrified at the number of people in classes and the lack of provision. The government argues that the amount of money that's gone into higher education has increased drastically. Well, yes, but then so have student numbers. So the amount of money per student has not increased massively over the last 10 years. And now we're looking at ridiculous cuts to education provision, which can only affect the quality of the education that this and other institutions can provide.
Have you got any idea how the student to teacher ratio sort of works? Is there an ideal number that says for every 20 students there should be 1 lecturer, or is it every 30? Is there?
There's no ideal figure. I mean, you ask any student or any member of staff, you would say, well, the ideal figure is low. It would be lovely to have 5 students to 1 member of staff. It would be lovely to have seminar groups with just 5 students, because then you can give more time, of course, to your students. What we're looking at is a sector average in the Russell group of something like between 16 to 1 and 20 to 1. And that's students to lecturers. But at the University of Leeds, we did some calculations before Christmas, and it looks like if they make this large number of cuts in staff, they will be looking at something like 22 to 1. They'll be looking at some of the worst staff-student ratios in the Russell group. So that doesn't bode well either. And what's going on now, when we have these financial discussions in our departments, a low staff-student ratio is now a dirty word. So, oh, you've got 16:1, that's terrible, we need to get those numbers up to make ourselves financially viable. And it's almost like the educational value of a low student-to-staff ratio is no longer being discussed.